The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hey everybody, good to see you today. We are live on YouTube, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, as we are every Monday through Thursday. A lot to follow up on over the weekend. Of course, let's first just get everybody up to speed with the Boston Marathon bombing. Of course, a week ago today, almost a week to the hour, Lewis, Monday, April 15th, 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time, we had 3 dead and close to 183 injured after 2 bombs went off near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And after a couple of days of a lot of false and incorrect reports about who the suspects were and about pictures, we had on Thursday the FBI's photo release of 2 suspects that were the focus of the investigation. Now, only 5 hours after the release of the photos, the suspects allegedly killed an MIT police officer and also carjacked an SUV, forcing the driver to give the suspect money and also to withdraw cash from an ATM. Now, eventually, the 2 suspects were identified, as you know, Lewis, with the help of the public. And, I mean, literally something like 3,000 leads a minute were coming into the FBI as Zohar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Police were able to track them to Watertown, Massachusetts, very close to Boston. A shootout ensued. An MBTA officer was critically injured. Tamerlan Tsarnaev was captured and actually died from injuries he had sustained, possibly from being run over by his brother Zohar. Now, do we have confirmation on those details, Natan? I'm seeing a lot of conflict.
There's no confirmation, but he certainly did it. He did run his brother over, and I think he was still alive when he ran him over, and he died after that incident. So it might not be because of that, but it was definitely in the ballpark.
Now, during that incident, Zohar also was injured. He escaped. He eluded being apprehended. Thousands of military and other law enforcement personnel conducted a manhunt in a 20-block area of Watertown. Authorities requested that all residents in the surrounding area stay indoors. Public institutions, businesses were closed. The public transportation system was shut down. And eventually, Zohar was found just outside of that 20-block radius, Lewis, that was locked down. After seeing a blood-stained tarp on his boat, and actually lifting the tarp and seeing Zohar Tsarnaev inside, he was eventually captured after a standoff and taken to a hospital. He is now awake, we have read. By the FBI's own admission, the FBI had been warned about the older brother, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, in 2011 by a foreign government presumed to be Russia. The FBI says they checked their databases. They interviewed Tamerlan. They interviewed other family members, and they found no evidence of terrorism activity. After that, the FBI requested more information from that foreign government and did not receive it. That was followed by that 6-month trip to Russia.
Right.
So probably there will be a lot more information about that forthcoming. The latest information now is that Zohar Tsarnaev will not be tried as an enemy combatant. He is being charged at least with conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction. That's where we are now. Hopefully that does not include any of the rumors that are now circulating, but does include close to all of what we now consider to be the basic circumstances of the case.
Right. So there are so many issues. 1, our intelligence. Did they drop the ball here? 2, who was he visiting with and what was he doing in Russia? I mean, the younger brother, was he at all involved, or was he just coaxed by his older brother?
So many of these questions. Yeah. Now that we've gotten the facts out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about my reactions to this. After the capture of Zohar, we had a ton of video of people all over Boston cheering, celebrating, chanting USA. And I have to say, I'm having a hard time with all of the celebrating and cheering following the taking into custody of the younger brother after, of course, his older brother was killed. I mean, I'm happy and grateful that law enforcement worked tirelessly, I mean, day and night through 5 days to end this specific threat and capture the individuals presumed to be responsible for the Boston bombing. The compassion we saw from Boston area residents was compelling, Lewis, no question about it. The compassion we saw from people all over the country and the world contributing to the medical funds of a lot of the victims, absolutely inspired by it. It is just hard for me to understand the belligerent cheering. It's reminiscent of a sports team winning a game or a championship. And given that people died, people have injuries that they may never fully recover from, they may not even have the resources to treat properly. And more importantly, that we have a serious problem in our society that these things are happening. I understand feeling safer and sleeping better, knowing that those individuals were no longer on the loose. But remember, there were multiple shootings in Boston during the 5 days between the marathon bombing and the death and capture of the suspects that weren't really given any airtime because they were kind of a normal part of Boston life, right? We can appreciate the efforts that were put forward to stop the immediate threat, and we're going to start bringing at least Jahar Tsarnaev to justice. But when I think about this level of violence, in spite of my own feelings of gratitude for stopping the immediate threat, I'm too sad about the status quo to think about cheering and celebrating. That's just me.
Right. We live in a country where people are dying every day from ruthless violence. And I know this was kind of a unique situation,
right,
in which there were countless injuries and some very gruesome deaths. But, I mean, I still consider this to be a quasi-dystopic society.
Right. I mean, watching and listening to the USA chants in the Boston Common, I thought, yes, it was USA law enforcement that caught the guy. And it's also the USA that has some pretty extensive and unique violence problems of all kinds, including the fact that people end up wanting to do this thing, the fact that the other murders that took place in Boston during the search are so commonplace that they barely get any coverage, right? I mean, USA, but these guys were, for all intents and purposes, American. One an American citizen, the other on his way or in process of becoming an American citizen. I can't help but think about the fact also that we do this to others daily, right? I mean, remember the feeling of hearing the news? This happened so close to our studio, the feeling of helplessness, terror, the feeling that we just were attacked and we didn't know it was coming and we had our resources there and we couldn't do anything about it. This is how others feel when we drop bombs or drone others overseas. And for those saying it's different because we're targeting bad guys, fine. But first of all, we've been wrong sometimes, right? When Stanley McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, told the story about droning an innocent farmer who was just working his land. And let's take it a step further. Let's say the bombing in Boston was targeted to kill one bad guy, and it killed 2 innocent bystanders and it injured 183. Would we be saying it's okay, or would we still be feeling that same terror? So I have a number of takeaways here. Let's figure out why we have this violence problem. Let's allow the incident to also make us think critically about our foreign policy and the ongoing war on terror. And we just need to, I don't know, that was my reaction. The cheer, I couldn't get behind the cheering.
Yeah, I mean, after this, people are not going to feel more safe because they caught these guys. I mean, it's after an attack like this that you feel less safe, and that every time someone goes to a big public event, they're going to think about this. And that's kind of the goal of terrorism.
I'm running a 5K. You're running a 5K on Sunday. Is this going to cross your mind when you reach the finish line?
Of course.
It's going to cross my mind. No question about it.
Yeah, it would be pretty crazy if it didn't.
Another issue I want to address is, are Caucasians now going to be profiled? I mean, it's fascinating. Now that we have white perpetrators in the Boston Marathon bombing, their whiteness has become completely irrelevant. White is never used in describing the suspects. It was not addressed in any of the press conferences I saw that we have. We have a manhunt for a white individual. I didn't hear it. I think maybe there was one instance where one official mentioned it, right? I mean, white American Muslim bombers. Nobody ever thought about this possibility. Natan, nobody even considered this could be a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any mystery as to what's going on. I mean, it's the people of color are considered an other. They're labeled as such. That's how people talk about them. The sort of default standard, whether it's explicit or implicit, is that you're white and probably that you're Christian. So this is like the standard. We all know this. That's why it's reported as such.
Sikh American activist and filmmaker Valerie Kaur pointed out another example of the double standard, which actually David Sirota described quite a bit. He said, let's remember that the Oak Creek mass shooting was actually the last incident of domestic terrorism in this country. It was committed by a white supremacist who walked into a Sikh house of worship. We did not hear calls for white people to be profiled. We did not hear Christianity denigrated or Christians living in fear. The way that our country diagnoses a problem when it's a white perpetrator is that it's an individual problem. I think this is an interesting thing. I mean, there are so many other pressing issues with this case, and they're being discussed, but I think it's interesting to talk about, we have two white perpetrators here, and all of a sudden their whiteness is just not a factor.
Well, it's easy to profile a minority, right? Because there's fewer of them.
Sure.
They're the ones who stick out in a crowd. So how do you profile white people? I mean, it seems like such a huge undertaking that it wouldn't even be worth the effort on any front. Of course, I'm not saying that profiling people of other races is worth the effort, obviously.
No, but just in the context of how this has been carried out.
Right.
The other thing that's interesting is that we're also talking about them in the context of immigrants, right? And I find it interesting because one an American citizen, one close to being an American citizen. How far after you've come into this country is the fact that you came from another country a factor? I mean, let's think about me, right? I came to this country when I was 5. I became a citizen when I was 17. If I now committed an act of terror, what would be pointed at, right? What would be pointed at? Would it be, listen, this is a guy who came into this country. Clearly, our immigration system did not work well because we didn't identify him. We didn't stop him. This guy was running around our country, and then he committed this act of terror. That's another framing, I think, that is interesting, which is this is because these guys aren't from the U.S. And how far does that work? I don't know. I'm asking the question.
Well, we know how the corporate media works,
right? We do.
They would say, yes, this is clearly something that needs to be looked at. They'd say, well, let's look at the parents. Let's look at the grandparents.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple of stories kind of tangentially related to this. An Arkansas lawmaker on Friday morning, Arkansas State Rep Nate Bell, he's of course a Republican, mocked Boston liberals. And if you actually look at the tweet he sent out, he said, I wonder how many Boston liberals spent the night cowering in their homes, wishing they had an AR-15 with a high-capacity magazine, of course, in the context of the Boston Marathon bombings. Now, he's apologized for the timing. This is yet another one of those cases. You apologize about when you said it, how you said it, or who was offended by what you said, but never for what you actually said. He posted on Facebook and Twitter, I would like to apologize to the people of Boston and Massachusetts for the poor timing of my tweet earlier this morning. As a staunch and unwavering supporter of the individual right of self-defense, I express my point of view without thinking of its effect on those still in time of crisis. In hindsight, given the ongoing tragedy that is still unfolding, I regret the poor choice of timing, as usual, timing. Well, you know, there's actually a pretty specific counter-argument to this, right? Which is, what if everybody in Boston did have AR-15s when all of those incorrect pictures of suspects were circling around on the front page of the New York Post? Innocent people, sometimes under 18, with red circles around them. What if everybody had AR-15s and they saw those individuals walk by? What would have happened? Would that be a better situation? Would we be better off today?
And if everyone at the race had an assault rifle, would that somehow have stopped those pressure cookers from exploding? No.
That's exactly right. And it's obviously an absurd comment, Natan. But again, the fact that he only apologizes for the timing is just kind of par for the course.
Yeah, although I also think that I was reading a lot of comments online, and people sort of aren't addressing the basic idea there as much. They seem to be just criticizing that, oh, he's politicizing the issue. But the reality is that we all politicize issues when we think that they're examples of things that aren't being addressed, and we want to signal it. And to him, I mean, I think it is a valid point that there are certainly some people in Boston that probably, you know, heads of households, parents that are thinking when they're on that street where they found Joe Carr, you know, maybe I should have a gun because what if this guy comes into my house? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a real thing.
It is a real thing, no question about it. And we'll follow that story. Glenn Beck said at the end of his broadcast last week that he believes there is a cover-up after the incorrect news broke last week that a Saudi man was being held and was a potential suspect. And then it was revealed that he actually was not a suspect. He was fully cooperative. Glenn Beck thought there was a conspiracy there. This is what Glenn Beck had to say last Friday.
So let me just say this to those at the highest echelons of government that know the tagging system. They know all about events, not files. We know who this Saudi national is. And it is in your best interest and in the best interest of integrity and trust for the people of the United States of America. It's best coming from you, not coming from a news organization. It's best coming from you. You have until Monday.
There you go. So there is a threat from Glenn Beck. And then what happened today? Glenn Beck issuing the following explanation about the Saudi man who he believes is involved in a government cover-up.
I believe this man in the hospital, his mission was to recruit fighters that are already in the country. That way they can't be tracked crossing international borders. Once he recruits, then he could fund and provide the go order when the time came. These two that were captured and killed on Friday would have been easy targets for an al-Qaeda recruiter. Hailing from Chechnya, being Muslims themselves, they would have been sympathetic. During the first Chechnyan war, al-Qaeda set up several training camps in 1994. They were funded, what a surprise, by charities run by Saudi Arabia. The al-Qaeda links are too much to ignore here.
All right, so now he's reading off something. But in any case, so that's Glenn Beck's theory. The Saudi national is an al-Qaeda recruiter. And even though government says that he is not being deported, there is this whole controversy over he was being deported and then he's not because that would have been too obvious and so on and so forth. That's Glenn Beck's take. That's what it is, and that's his opinion. And hey, he's entitled to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure where he's getting his information. It seems like it was just completely fabricated.
Well, he knows, Lewis. He knows.
I don't think
about
he does.
What's going on? He knows. Anyway, that's what he has going on there.
All right.
So we'll continue to follow Glenn Beck.
So Glenn Beck did not one-up the government.
Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on your definition of the government. I'm sorry, of one-up.
Right.
Okay, 2 things I would love for you to do. Number 1, visit our website, davidpakman.com. We're entering the last full week of our Indiegogo fundraiser. This bright green banner here, click it, check out the perks we've set up for our Indiegogo fundraiser, and make a contribution. We are now giving away... we've added bumper stickers made at the request of Indiegogo contributors starting at the $10 level. Please check that out. And also become a David Pakman Show member. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up, get the bonus show, support the show. We'll be back after this. So much more to talk about.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you ever use Amazon.com to buy stuff online, go to our website, davidpakman.com. On the right side of the website, there's a big A that links you to Amazon. Click that link, do your shopping, check out, and you'll send 7% of your purchase back to the David Pakman Show without costing you anything extra. You can also bookmark that link. And of course, you can become a David Pakman Show member, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're at all worried about liberal bias in statistics, facts, other reality-based things, liberalbias.com will show you how to unskew reality and make it easier for the conservative worldview to handle. Today's new member of the day is Corey Duplantis. Corey, thank you for becoming a David Pakman Show member. Couldn't do it without you. Let me issue a book recommendation, Lewis.
Please.
It's with great pleasure that I recommend this book, which, of course, is supported by A Fashion of Bastards by Joanna Louise Johnson, the genre-busting environmental intrigue story that has readers asking, could it be true? I'm going to recommend a short story by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is the first Dostoevsky that I've read, and it's fantastic. I don't know if I lucked out and got a good translation, Lewis, of course, translated from Russian. This is the story, A Nasty Anecdote, and it takes place, actually, in the 1860s, and when reading it, this may be partly the translation, but it also may be Dostoevsky's skill as a writer. it does not seem in any way dated or out of place. And you have to remind yourself, oh, wait a second, it's 1862 that this is taking place in. It's a short story. I won't spoil, since it is a short story, I won't give you a synopsis because I'd basically be giving you the whole story. But a nasty anecdote, I highly recommend it. Fyodor Dostoevsky.
So you're calling it what, a timeless classic?
I'm not calling it a timeless classic, but I'm highly recommending people check it out. And it's actually part of a compilation of 4 or 5 short stories, all of which are excellent.
Very good.
All right. Thank you, Lewis, for allowing me to do that.
No problem.
Hey, this is really weird. I was sent video of, remember that guy who he doesn't go by it, but a lot of people call him Porno Pete, Peter LaBarbera. He was on the show years ago, and we had a fascinating, riveting, titillating conversation. He was being interviewed by Coach Dave Daubenmire. I have no idea why the guy goes by the name Coach Dave Daubenmire. He's an anti-gay guy from the Pass the Salt Ministries. And he was talking to Dave Daubenmire about how he finds it reassuring that the gay community is impacted by sexually transmitted infections and violence. And to him, that confirms that God believes being gay is an abomination. And as I was watching the video, as compelled as I was by the idea that LaBarbera is reassured by illness in the gay community when it takes place, I was more fascinated by the fact that as soon as Peter LaBarbera mentions gay sex, the guy interviewing him, Coach Dave Daubenmire, starts moaning. The guy sounds like he's getting physically, you can hear him audibly aroused by the discussion of gay sex. This is really weird. It starts about 20 seconds in. Listen to when he starts talking about barebacking. The guy interviewing him starts moaning 3 times. You're going to like this, Lewis. Take a listen to this.
It's reassuring because, and to me, it's always reassuring because if God believes this is an abomination, Coach,
right,
detestable,
Coach,
then, it turns out that, the real world is backing up what the Bible says about homosexuality.
Right.
If it really is a detestable behavior, as God says, you would expect it to be linked disproportionately to disease. We see lots of gay-on-gay violence, domestic
10 seconds
violence.
Here.
We see, Coach, I was in San Francisco, and they're selling all the stores that were selling videos were selling these. Can I say it?
Sure.
They're called barebacking videos. They're glamorizing sodomy without a condom, which I thought that the condom was supposed to be the answer to HIV. And here in San Francisco, of all places,
ladies and gentlemen, we've not modified that in any way. With every single moan, Coach Dave Daubenmire seems more and more aroused by the mention of gay sex from Porno Peter LaBarbera. Let's just listen to it once more, Lewis, because I don't want the audience to miss a second of this idiocy. Listen for the moaning, increasingly aroused with every mention of gay sex. These guys are anti-gay, remember.
Coach, I was in San Francisco, and they're selling all the stores that were selling videos were selling these. Can I say it?
Sure.
They're called barebacking videos. They're glamorizing sodomy without a condom, which I thought that the condom was supposed to be the answer to HIV. And here in San Francisco, of all,
I mean, couldn't just these be like grunts of disgust?
Yes.
Well, I think that's the idea, but they're indistinguishable from grunts of ecstasy. That's the funny thing.
It does sound funny.
By the way, if he thinks that if Peter LaBarbera, on a serious note, thinks that gay people being affected by STIs and violence is a sign from God, he must really think that all of the heterosexually spread diseases and violence committed by straight people is a really big sign from God, right? Or does it not apply both ways?
No, that's probably just someone who's gay getting themselves involved in the straight community.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson was asked about video games and role-playing games and strategy games, and he says, this is just so crazy, that Dungeons and Dragons is demonic and has literally ruined people's lives. You can't make this stuff up. You just really can't. Here's Pat Robertson.
I want to ask for your opinion. Is it safe for a Christian to enjoy video games that have magic in them if the person playing the games is not practicing the magic?
Right.
I think, the idea is not how close can I get to danger,
Really?
but how far away can I stay from it. I don't know what game you're talking about. I know there's one called Dungeons and Dragons that literally destroyed people's lives. I mean, they got into this thing and it was like demonic. I don't know what game you're talking about, but if it's based on magic and the occult and that sort of thing, stay away from it. There are other
He's heard about this thing, Dungeons and Dragons, which has destroyed people's lives. What, did their figurine get knocked off of the table? I mean, how can it destroy people's lives?
Good question. I don't think he could tell you because he doesn't actually know anything about it.
Right.
But, I mean, if you want to listen to Pat Robertson, pretty much all you can play is like, Boggle.
No, because couldn't you make a word? Like, couldn't you make the word magic and then that could ruin your life?
Oh, right.
Hey, when I was a kid, I played this video game, true story, called XCOM Apocalypse. You remember that game, Lewis?
Yeah.
Hell of a game. And they actually had to my family had to bring in a Catholic exorcist to rid me of demons. And it was weird, not only because I thought I was fine, but because my whole family is Jewish. I was like, why do we have a Catholic exorcist here? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And then they deleted the game, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Hey, when you used to play, you've talked about when you played Warcraft, right? Mm-hmm. When you played Warcraft, were you worried that you may have been infested with evil spirits? Like, did you choose a specific character type, like the goblin or the healer, based on which was the least evil in your mind?
You know what? I actually did pick the ones that were considered less evil.
There you go.
You have to like choose a side.
Yeah.
And in one is very clearly like the grotesque evil creatures, and the other is like the more normal ones. Mm-hmm. I chose the more normal ones.
I think you did the right thing. You didn't end up having to have an exorcism.
The side of light.
Yeah.
Of good.
All right, let's take a break. DavidPakman.com/membership. Please become a member. We've got some great benefits, and it's the #1 way this program stays on the air. We'll take a break. Next, we'll talk to constitutional law professor Adam Winkler. A lot to discuss. Stay with us. Glad you're here today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me today is Adam Winkler. He's a professor of constitutional law at the UCLA School of Law, also author of Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America. Adam, great to talk to you again. I want to talk about some of the controversy that started after the arrest of the Boston Marathon bombing suspect, Johar Tsarnaev, and the fact that he was not Mirandized. He was going to be spoken to under the public safety exception. So first, let's talk about what that exception is and when it applies.
Well, that's right. The Miranda rule, as so many Americans already know, requires the government to warn you that you have a right to remain silent and a right to counsel. And that if you're denied those things, the government can't admit into evidence the testimony that you give to the police officers before seeking counsel. And that rule has an exception known as the public safety exception. It says where there's an imminent threat to public safety, the government can interrogate you to try to get information. Say if the Tsarnaevs had left other bombs around Boston, for instance, and they wanted to find out, make sure they got that information ASAP with imminence. But it is a limited requirement. It does require there be an imminent danger. It wouldn't be an imminent danger to say we're trying to investigate his links back in Chechnya or Russia. It would have to be something that poses a clear and present danger imminently to citizens here in the United States right away.
So the concerns from some have been that by using the public safety exception, due process was not that he was not getting due process, and that somehow the spirit of the law, if not the letter, was being circumvented. Now, what I want to do first is just to look at what we know. He was a suspect in a terrorist bombing. He had engaged with police the previous night and is alleged to have thrown pipe bombs. It was unclear where he got those pipe bombs and if there were more bombs. Do you think that, broadly speaking, from an outsider's point of view, those things make a public safety exception valid in this particular case?
Well, at least for a limited time, they certainly do. They had multiple bombs. We know that they had more bombs than they used at the Boston Marathon site because they blew up another one the next night. And so we know that they had more bombs. The government, what we really don't know is what information the government had, right? Presumably the government's got more information about the Tsarnaevs and their plot than they've made clear so far through their own intelligence gathering. And so we don't know. Maybe they had special reason to believe that there was another bomb that had been planted. it. But I do think it's becoming clear that the imminence that justifies the public safety exception is no longer in effect. We've already had public officials, and including the governor in the state of Massachusetts, say that the public threat has ended. Once the public threat has ended, it's no longer an imminent public safety threat that can allow the government to continue to interrogate.
Okay, so let's address the concerns then. What happens now? Are people right to be concerned about what, right? I mean, it's kind of a broad constitutional concern, an argument about is he getting due process or not? What should happen now? And if it doesn't happen, what may be the recourse of that? What may be the repercussions? Would certain things not be admissible in a potential trial? And who would decide that?
Well, ultimately, the questions, like all questions in American law, go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will issue a final determination. It depends on what the government wants to do. The government here now could take two approaches. It could take the approach that we're going to treat him like a criminal and provide him with basic rights to counsel and due process, speedy trial. He is entitled to those things clearly as an American citizen. The government may do what it's done in some other terrorism cases, especially during the Bush years, which is to say, you know what, we think this is a special exception. We're going to treat it differently, and we're going to let the courts decide in the long run whether we're right or wrong. The process by which you wait to get a court decision and ultimately a final ruling by the Supreme Court could be 4 or 5 years down the line. So the government really does have the discretion in some ways to say, hey, you know what, this is a terrorism. We think this is a terrorist. We think this is a different question than what's been answered by the Supreme Court before, even though the court has said American citizens are entitled to their constitutional rights.
I find myself split given that on this issue, because on the one hand, I share a lot of the concerns many people have about people being denied due process, cases of indefinite detention with no charges coming. But I feel that this is really a different case in that we know who this individual is. We've had an international following of the case, and these cases where we have these unknown suspects who may not even be the right person being held somewhere where we don't even know, that's a concern. But this seems like a very different situation from that, and I don't want to mix the two issues.
This is a very clear-cut case in terms of terrorism from what we know so far. Of course, we don't have all the evidence yet, so we shouldn't make too many rush to judgments, but we should recognize that it's always risky to put exceptions into our constitutional rights. You know, for whether we think Tsarnaev is a terrorist or not, it seems clearly he is to me. He's entitled to our constitutional rights. He's an American citizen captured on domestic soil. We don't want to empower government to say, hey, we think you're a terrorist, we're going to arrest you, and we're not going to let you see a counsel and challenge that determination that you're a terrorist. It's funny, in the gun debate, we just got through this debate, and opponents of gun reform said, hey, you know what, this is a slippery slope. If we allow government to have extended background checks, the next thing you know, it'll empower government to come take away all our guns. And what we really would be doing if we start creating exceptions for American citizens captured here on domestic soil would be to empower government to become tyrannical, to basically take someone off the streets and say, you know what, we think you're a terrorist. Here we know a lot of facts. We know about Tsarnaev. We know about this whole case. But what if they come by your house tomorrow and pick you up and no one knows about it? If government's got the power, they can do that.
So now you said earlier that ultimately the Supreme Court, if it goes that far, would decide whether interrogators went too far without Mirandizing beyond the public safety exception. Given that, the concerns that whatever it is people worry about might happen if he's not Mirandized or is refused counsel, wouldn't that ultimately be appealed and eventually be made right? In other words, for whatever concern people may have in the short term, eventually, if he wasn't given due process, wouldn't the Supreme Court make that call?
I think the Supreme Court would likely insist on Tsarnaev being awarded due process. They've already made clear in a case called Hamdi against Rumsfeld that American citizens who are captured abroad, in this case Afghanistan, engaged in active hostilities against the United States, are still entitled to due process and can go to federal court to challenge their detention. So there's no doubt that Tsarnaev would have at least that, and quite obviously, because he was captured on domestic soil, likely much more. So I think he's entitled to due process, and the Supreme Court will ultimately decide it. Nonetheless, one of the things that angered a lot of people during the Bush administration was the government's seeming disregard for constitutional rights, and to throw up its hand and say it's not our responsibility, let the courts make those decisions. The Constitution should be a check on every branch of government, and everything lawmakers do, the executive officials do, or the courts do. And it's important that the president respect the Constitution, regardless of what the Supreme Court's going to do in 4 years down the line.
So bottom line, Adam, based on what we know now, the initial public safety exception sounds like it was valid to you. And now, as long as the rest of this investigation is carried out in accordance with the Constitution, you don't see any problems.
I don't. We'll have to see what the administration does, what course it chooses to take.
All right, we've been speaking with Adam Winkler, professor of constitutional law at the UCLA School of Law. Also, check out his book, Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America. I've read it. I enjoyed it. Adam, thanks as always for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to thank everybody who is watching us live today, coming from the We Survive Bush, You'll Survive Obama Facebook page, as well as the Too Informed to Vote Republican page, and the I Love It When I Wake Up in the Morning and Barack Obama is President Facebook page. Check all of those out. Corruption alert we need to think about, Lewis. Remember that vote last week we discussed where we had a possibility of an amendment which would mandate across the board background checks to purchase guns. That didn't pass in spite of overwhelming support from actual people.
Right.
Well, it turns out that most of the senators who voted against that received cash from the gun lobby. Probably won't be surprising to many people, but it is interesting information to look at. All but 3 of the U.S. senators who voted against background checks last week received money from the gun lobby. It's very simple, Lewis. They get money and then they help the gun lobby. It's kind of very straightforward.
Is it possible that their intent all along is to help the gun lobby?
And they're just going to take the money?
Because they are so hardcore, Second Amendment, however they interpret it, that the NRA is just like, well, you know what? Okay, we'll just help these guys.
If that were the case, the NRA wouldn't give them money because they would say, hey, they're already going to do everything we want.
Right.
But what's that, Natan?
Well, they might lose. So what Lewis is saying makes sense. They would help them win because they know that they actually believe it. So they're like a definite yes vote for, gun nuts.
Of the 45 senators who voted no on gun law reform that would have expanded background checks, 42 took money from pro-gun groups, according to an analysis done by The Guardian and Sunlight Foundation, which is a nonprofit that uses the internet to promote government transparency. Federal Election Commission campaign disclosures show that the NRA gave $800,000 to 40 of the senators who voted against gun reform since 1990. 47% of the House of Representatives received donations from the NRA during the last campaign. Also, the Sunlight Foundation analysts find that in close races, the NRA spent large sums of money opposing Democratic nominees. The NRA spent almost $1 million opposing Sherrod Brown, $626,000 opposing Bill Nelson, etc., etc. There are also a lot of other groups that they're not specifically gun groups, but like, for example, we have the Madison, it's the Madison something or other. The Madison Project is a right-wing group, and it lists the opposite of gun control. It lists expansion of gun rights and defending gun rights as one of its top issues. So how does it pass the most basic logic test to say that people getting money from lobbies won't legislate differently based on having received that money? We hear this all the time. We hear it in media and we hear it in politics. Listen, we have advertisers, they give us money. I have donors, they give me money. But what I do / what I report, depending on whether we're talking about a media outlet or a politician, is in no way affected by who gives me money. It just doesn't make sense. This is a system of legalized bribery, period. Even if Lewis is right that there are some cases where the individual would be voting the same way anyway, it is a system of legalized bribery.
Yeah, obviously, if you look at all the instances of this, you can usually just follow the money, and there is a nasty relationship between donors, lobbyists, and laws being made.
It's a disgusting relationship.
Or laws being
not made.
Not made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Michelle Bachmann is now under 4 investigations. Ned Flaherty, who's a friend of the show and previous guest on the show, pointed me to a great article on New Civil Rights Movement, also great friends of the David Pakman Show, which shows that Michelle Bachmann, Republican congresswoman from Minnesota, is now under 4 separate investigations. This is just unreal. There is a city police investigation going on. They're investigating, this is the Urbandale, Iowa Police Department, who's investigating data theft from a staffer's computer. There's a state legislature investigation, the Iowa Senate Ethics Panel. There are 2 federal investigations going on, the Federal Election Commission and the Office of Congressional Ethics. It just, how deep does it go? It's unbelievable. These started after Bachmann was charged with improperly paying Iowa State Senator Kent Sorensen $7,500 a month to double as her Iowa campaign chair. And there are 2 top campaign aides, former campaign aides of Michelle Bachmann, who are actually testifying against her, Lewis. You can't script this stuff any better.
No, this is great.
Michelle Bachmann, Chief of Staff Andy Parrish, is going to be testifying against her. And Bachmann Director of Faith Outreach Peter Waldron will be testifying against her. Now remember, Peter Waldron is the guy who said that the Holy Ghost told him that Michelle Bachmann is the one for president. Is this going to be a case of live by the lie, die by the lie?
I don't know. I feel like a couple of these are just going to eventually be inconclusive and nothing will really happen. And worst case scenario, as we see with high-level politicians, even when they are convicted, they usually aren't doing any hard time. And if they are, it's usually in like the equivalent of a hotel. I
actually think this is all a conspiracy related to Benghazi and to gay people.
What about Benghazi?
Yeah. What happened to the talking
Obama's dog walker?
Yeah. We need to have an investigation into dog handlers. All right, so there's Michelle Bachmann. 4 investigations going on. We'll see what happens. Let's get to some of your voicemails. Our voicemail line is open to you 24 hours a day, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail about the mouse problem I have at my place that I've announced. The exterminator is showing up tomorrow, Lewis. We'll see how that goes. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David. This is Ray from San Diego. Just a warning. I heard on your TV show this morning that your condo was being treated for mice infestation. Some years ago, maybe 10, there was an outbreak among American Indians in the southwest of the Hante virus caused by kangaroo mice. Make sure you sterilize all your cooking utensils before using them to avoid this.
Yeah, I'm kind of freaked out by that, but don't we just have field mice here? Like, I don't know that we have kangaroo mice.
I don't know. They've got giant snails in Miami, so I suppose there could be kangaroo mice in Massachusetts.
In any case, after I saw that the mouse was in my dishwasher, I have not been using the dishwasher. I've been hand washing, which is, it is what it is. It's back to hand washing.
I hand wash.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I have to say my dishes are way cleaner after starting to hand wash, but it is kind of a pain.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll keep you posted on the mouse situation. Also a comment on our Indiegogo fundraiser. Take a listen to this.
Yo, David P. It's Patty D. from Minneapolis. Just gave my $10 to the Indigo. I can't wait to get my bumper sticker and have my Toyota Tundra wear it proudly. So I'm just very excited. Keep up the good work, and I'm glad you got your $8,000 mark, and hopefully you'll get to 9 here soon enough. Let's get you on that cruise too, bro. Have a good one.
All right, I don't know anything about the cruise, but do you know what that reference is to? A cruise?
I don't know, the MILF cruise?
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Cougar cruise, sorry, not MILF cruise. It's Cougar cruise.
But we covered that months ago. Why would he be talking about that?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's just random. I'm not sure. In any case, Lewis, the bumper stickers are fantastic. Indiegogo, the campaign is happening. We did pass $9,000. Now the target is $10,000. Please check out our Indiegogo campaign. Go to our website, davidpakman.com. Click on the bright green banner. Could you miss that banner?
Well, depends on if you have
color blindness,
macular issues.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Lewis, for bringing us to a complete grinding halt.
Yep.
Also, become a David Pakman Show member. You can find that easily on our website, davidpakman.com. It's this bright orange box here. Lewis, could macular issues also affect finding that box?
Sure, yeah.
Great. All right. davidpakman.com/membership. We've got great stuff coming up this week. Remember that story last week? We talked about hospital profit margins increasing when surgery goes wrong. Remember that story, Lewis?
I do.
Tomorrow, Dr. Andrew Gonzalez is going to be joining us. He is a surgeon, and he writes on health, political issues. Very much looking forward to having him on. We're going to talk to him about that and is it even possible to create a system where you actually you incentivize treating things right the first time around. What a crazy idea, Lewis.
That would be ideal.
It would be ideal.
Yeah.
So he'll be on tomorrow. Great show coming up tomorrow. Thanks for being with us. Sign up. I would love it if you were a member by 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. We'll see you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.